Hey everyone, this is Jan and you're watching the making of Fosphor episode 6. This is the episode in which I do that thing which a couple of months ago I said I would not do, which is redrawing. So just in case you're new to this channel, I'm Jan. I have been making a comic book called Fosphor for the last couple of years, and it's something that I've been doing in my spare time since I have a full-time job here in Barcelona. And in order to keep the project moving along, because it tends to come in waves that I have all the time in the world, I don't have any time at all. I try and keep myself disciplined and work on it every single day. But in order to keep it going, the last couple of months, I've said to myself, I'm not going to redraw anything. There's a whole bunch of art that feels out of place, because over time, of course, you tend to get better. And I said to myself, I'm not going to redraw anything. First, I'm going to finish the comic book. And this is the point where we're at right now. The comic book, art-wise, is as good as finished. There might be a page or two here and there that I still want to add. Like I thought of a new ending. I've been moving pages around, like as I've been talking about in the last couple of episodes. But now that I have all the pages laid out in front of me, I have some reservations with some of the art, and I feel like I could do better. And one of the ways that I've become better is, well, if you look at this page right here. So this is the original page 3, sorry, which is the introduction of the Taskmaster, and I feel like I've cropped the page all wrong and started doodling around. And quite frankly, a lot of the panels feel a little low resolution, and I feel the story could be told a little bit better so it flows better from one page to the next. So what I want to show you in this episode is 7 pages, more or less, that are going to get a little touching up or just outright redrawing, or, yes, dare we say it, even cutting up. Here we have the page. And now we are flexible. We could put this one right over here. We can put that one right over here. And there's space for this one. Right here. Always good to be less precious about the art and let the art do its thing. This feels good, you know. It's really interesting thinking outside of the box traditionally, rather than, you know, all the things you can do in Photoshop. I don't know, it's just, I've always felt, or I fell into this trap of needing all these particular kinds of tools. And they are great tools and they can save you a lot of time, but at the end of the day, not having them should not stop me from putting the work in and finishing this actual book, you know. There's a couple other things I don't like about this page, and I didn't realize that before when I originally made them. One of my weaknesses is, well, I suppose you could call it composition, but I have a tendency to crop images badly. So if I just put this back down, on this page you could say that the taskmaster, this character, the big boss man, is you know, having a bit of a quiet moment at the start of his day, meditating, sitting on a mat, being all spiritual. And so what he's actually doing, you can kind of infer, but is it perfectly clear? If you look at this panel right over here, so there's these, what I want to be interesting glyphs on the wall that are part of his belief system, so to speak. And I just cut it off. And then over here, again, there's a glimpse of it, and I just cut it off. And so I had this thought of like, if I could just extend this panel, I can put it back in. And it's just a decision I made while drawing it, that even though I quite like this panel, it's just poorly cropped, you know? So let's put this back down. The taskmaster. Right in the middle. I suppose that's kind of making a statement. We can even put him up, I suppose. So he's the first thing you get to see. But I kind of want her to, actually maybe that does work. If we move him up. Let's just try some stuff out. So this is a panel that was supposed to be here, and now we can put it here. Right? I think that works pretty well. She's coming in through the doorway. You get to have a look at his quarter, and then you see him. But I had this thought of having a different open panel as she's making her way to him. Of course, we can cut out the boring parts, but I can also do, this is her actually leaving. She's given him something to read, and she's exiting. And then this panel can go over here. See, that could work as well. Okay, let's see if I put this right here on top. I have this feeling now, like I don't want to cover up the art that I've drawn, but that's kind of like this preciousness that I have to get over. So let's say if we just put it here for a second. Oh, just put that right behind. And then what I intend to have over here, her walking towards him, could be her leaving his place on that floor, and then just putting it over here. So as you can see, traditionally, and we still have lots of options. Or maybe I do it like that. And just like in Photoshop, you have too many options. So I've found my new composition, and I've laid out the panels the way I want. So this is the part where I actually have to redraw some of the art. So as you can see, it's quite a sizable new piece of art. It's going to be, it's funny how this works, how some of the pages that I end up throwing away and some of the ideas that were in the original 10 pages that I put up on Gumroad all this time ago are coming back. It's like I discard them, but they're never really gone. Like they're not deleted from the story. It's just a question of what I actually choose to show you at this point in time. So now I've decided to actually bring this garden idea back as a background. So on the previous page, she is holding a key. She goes through another door, she locks it behind, comes around the corner, and there is the garden that's supposed to feed everyone. But then over here, she has to get into the next room. So let's put this, you could just put that there. And then just pull back and reassemble this page. Like this one is gonna go down here. Let's see if we could just line this up just like that. See that? And then the candles go about, I want some candles in the front. I have to remember how I lined this up before. Tiny candle over here. Not that it really matters all that much, but. And here we have the new page 3, which is a collage of the old page 3 with some new background based off an old idea. And on top now, I have Anne walking in the room without border panels. So you see the sequence of her getting in and showing off that level of the ship. So I'm redrawing this page 4, and this page is the one with the windy stairs. And this windy stairs I have been putting off for months. And there was a panel on a different page where I also decided to put the stairs in, so I had a bit of a practice, and then I forgot how to do it, so I had to have a little bit more practice. But that's wrong. Okay, let's do it. So here I am finally putting in the page 4 windy stairs. It's been a long time coming, but I really feel like my skills have improved over all these many months to the point where there's just more excitement than fear. Because if I screw it up, I can try it again. All of a sudden, with all these different techniques, whether it's the whiteout or the collages, ink suddenly feels a whole lot less, if that makes sense. So I've got the metal wiring, and so I have to draw everything in between while also keeping somewhat of a decent perspective going, or at least something that is believable. Maybe a little whiteout underneath these cables that I put in, because I had like a piece of cardboard, and I just put it up like that for a second, and I thought like, oh, that's so much clearer just a little white line, because the flashlight's going to be here, so it's going to be underneath. It just, it'll make sense. So let's see if we can finish up this this background before it is time to hit the sack and get ready for another day at the office. So redrawing this old page 6, you can see how I go to work on my pages. I tend to have a rough sketch right beside that tends to highlight the shadows a lot better, and just the poses and the composition on a page. And then on the actual page, I redraw that in blue pencil, which is something I picked up from Kevin Cross, who started the 100 Days of Making Comics, which is how I got back into making comics all that time ago. You should definitely check out his channel. He's got tons and tons of tips if you're an aspiring comic book artist. So I learned a lot from him. And so one of these things is using blue pencils. They're harder to erase, and so it makes me a lot messier. But then over time, one of the things that happened was I started feeling a lot more confident in just drawing straight on the page in ink. And so nowadays I tend to, because I have that rough sketch beside me, I tend to just do the bare minimum in blue pencil and do the actual rendering just straight on the page, Sometimes that works out really well. Sometimes, like in the case of this panel right here, I tend to overdo it a little bit. I feel like I did a little bit too much detail in the hair, and it's a little too messy. But overall, I'm quite happy with how these new panels came out. So why did I choose to redraw this particular page? Just like I mentioned on the old page 3 with the Taskmaster, some of the panels were simply drawn at a smaller scale than the newer pages, and they were a little too low resolution. I didn't mind the art itself that much. It felt crude, like the thickness, the boldness of the art compared to the newer pages. And that can work really well. There's one particular comic book, I don't have it right here, Outcast, where the artwork is really bold and thick lines and very impactful. So there's nothing wrong with drawing really thick. But for the kind of art that I end up producing later in the development of Fosphor issue 1, going back and putting some new pages in between, it just kind of felt a little bit out of place. So the new panels that I'm drawing are also much bigger close-ups of the characters that I'm introducing on these pages. And I feel like, again, with the thing I mentioned earlier of not being very good at cropping my panels and tending to zoom in a little too close so that you don't get the full gist of what's going on, I want to make amends on this new page and just giving you a full-on view of Tzilla, the supervisor, giving the captain, the commander of the ship, hell. Now, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, you might not know that usually I save these little snippets of Barcelona for my vlog, Sketchalona. But Sketchalona has been undergoing a little retooling, if you will. So if you'd like to see a little bit more behind the scenes and what I get up to besides making comics, but still on the art front, be sure to subscribe. And going for a little stroll, something I don't get to do very often during the week. the weekends because of the office hours. But yeah, it's nice just having a day to myself and trying out some of the local delicacies like crema catalan. Before heading back home and digging into the next page. So these are 2 pages where I'm gonna take out just the odd panel here and there and do a little bit of touching up. You can already see it on the top page. Just added a lot of heavy inks. It's just something that I've picked up in the past year where, you know, it's good, like trying to render as much as possible, but sometimes it really helps the overall reading of a page or 2 pages here when you have some very clear black shapes. So let's get to work, shall we? I hope this time lapse allows you to see what I've been learning, which is the when you render everything in very fine detail and use a lot of fine lines like I tend to do, it can become very hard to see the forest for the trees. And simply taking a brush and you know, putting down these very thick outlines can really save your page, I feel. Because now, you know, this being the thing that I've learned, I have to say that. But it kind of had me thinking, when it comes to time, there's this thing about making comic books professionally where you're always faced with a deadline. And I think when you have a deadline, you really have to scale back how much you can render sometimes. Or to put it differently, if you have a style that is, you know, very detailed, like the one I've been going for, when you're under the pressure of a deadline, I can imagine that every now and again you just put a panel in there with no background, or you just put a panel in there where there's a very large silhouetted figure just to save on time and to just give yourself that breather of like, okay, page done. And because I don't have that deadline and because I can just keep going, and I have just, you know, because I want this book to be the way I want this book to be, I've allowed myself to get carried away a little too much to the point that I've been making this mistake of over rendering and just putting in too much detail to the point that it's actually detrimental to the page. So that's kind of the thing I learned. Yeah. An entire comic. And this right here is the original page 6. I have decided to redraw this one. Sorry about the noise coming from outside, but it is a heat wave and I'm dying to redraw this one, along with a couple of other pages that need to be touched up. I think most of the heavy work is done already, but there's still a couple of pages left. So this one in particular, let me tell you why I'm not happy with it. One, if you see the page that comes before it, this art feels out of place. Two, I originally decided to draw at the actual scale of the page, right? And then afterwards, because I was always doodling around, I would end up using the entire page. I always liked what I drew outside of the bounds, wanted to put that in. So now I simply use the whole size and scale it down to fit. Gets more detail in, makes the line out more tight. The story that I'm telling on this page is still the story I want to be telling, which is we go from the bottom of this vessel all the way to the top, and every floor we visit, we meet new characters. This is the final floor. There's just one thing missing, because I didn't know how to draw it at the time. This is a window. This is like a ceiling sky dome type thing with protection flaps. And through it, we're supposed to see two people arguing from the previous page. I would like that to be a separate panel so that we zoom out to this one and you can see where we are, and then we zoom out a little further so that we see everything. So there's just one panel missing where I feel like there's some arguing here. Again, like I like these panels on their own, like the positioning, you know, talking heads, but the art can be better. I'm still very fond of this, even though this satellite dish looks a bit battered, and this should definitely be a little bit more over here. But you can see where, like, the way I want to render things and the texturing, shadow techniques were being developed here to what I feel very comfortable with doing now. There's certain fine detail over here that simply, you know, I find it a bit crude. And I think I could do a much better job if I simply pull out the camera and utilize the space available to me. But then I had a thought, and that is, let's put the comic book away. This is of course going to be hard to see because it's in blue pencil. But what we have here is my first attempt at a double spread. There's a couple of things I was thinking of, looking at some Indiegogos and Kickstarters, you know, just to orient myself for the future. And that is goodies. And then I'm like, well, how can I combine, say, drawing a poster and the comic book? Well, there are a number of images on pages that I think would make a great little poster. Then I thought, like, well, let's make a new one. And I'm doing this one this weekend. So this scene right here, which is a bit full on, because of course I was trying to limit myself to the space available, but also cheating and not giving myself a hard time on perspective. And then drawing some very crummy fences. Again, this place looks too beat up. There's no need for it to be this bad. Or is there? So this is going to be a drawing of the ship in perspective. There are two vantage points. One is like over here, it comes in, and then the other one is just over there, comes in. You're going to be able to see the side of the ship. There's going to be tiny people. There's going to be tons of detail outlining like where everything is, more or less, on the top. So this is going to be my first double spread. This is another one of those things where I feel comfortable in my skill level, because as I mentioned last time, there are just certain things that subconsciously you tend to stay away from, you know, that subconsciously you know you don't have the ability to do, so you don't want to tackle it head on. You just kind of, I've got a better idea, let me do it this way, you know. And so a double spread was the one thing that my comic book didn't have. And when I was flicking through the pages, like an actual comic book, so I could see which page would be next to which page, and then I came on page 6 and there was a blank spot next to it, I thought, wow, like at least one double spread in this comic book, you know, and it would be totally justified. That could work. I had a little bit of a debate about it with Maui, and my girlfriend suggested, she had a different idea. She thought I was taking it to, like, well, not what I was taking it, but she came up with like an isometric cut through of the whole vessel, and I thought, like, that's actually a really cool idea storytelling wise. Like, I love those kinds of things, but that's not what I'm doing here. But it did make me think, like, another thing I could do as a poster would be like an infographic, which is the layout of the entire ship, floor by floor, like an architect drawing, and I could do that on the inside of the cover. Not the first issue, because storytelling wise, I want to treat the ship, I want to treat this environment like a character in itself that you have to get to know. And so as you're reading the story, not just the first issue, but like the one after that and one after that, like you start piecing together where everything is in relation to everything else. And then at some point you get to see that infographic somewhere. I think, I'm not sure about the first issue, but I did have this idea before, which I always loved in X-Men annuals, drawn by Arthur Adams, where he would do little vignettes of the whole cast of characters on the first page, you know, with the names. I think that would be cool too, at some point. Maybe on the inside of issue 1, maybe issue 2. We'll see. Yes, I'm already thinking about issue 2. Well, you don't even have this one in your hands, but trust me, we're working on that. So back to my hand is about to fall off, and I had to take a lot of breaks because of it. It made me think about like doing this like 8 hours a day, day in, day out. Could I keep that up? Because this is like, wow, that's a lot of perspective. I learned a lot. I think there's a lot of texturing here on this one, where I was just trying stuff out, and that's a lot of fun, like the trying stuff out. But at the same time, I think once I get a little faster at this, you know, a little better, where's the original, then I think I could save a lot of time, because there was a lot of staring and just, you know, like, what am I doing? Because I'm not sure what I'm doing. But here we have it once again. This is the original page 6. You can see that this panel is still kind of there. So here you can see when I pull away with the camera, you can see all the textures on the hull. So I don't know if you noticed, but in the blue pencil layouts, I really focused on just the perspective and all the different parts of the ship. I actually let out the textures. I didn't draw them in. Not just because it would get too messy, but I figured I could just trust myself to do that in inks straight. And the way I went about it was to make sure that because it's a double spread and there's so much to see, I decided on light sources and then worked out some heavy shadows first and then some lighter shadows, and then bit by bit, it just kind of filled itself in, you know. All in all, I think it came out pretty good. I'm really happy with it. Like, you know, it was a lot of fun just drawing a background like this with just minimal figures. But I do think I have earned a little break. So it is time to head into the mountains. Plaza Mayor.
Dit is echt een typisch Catalaans bergdorp dit.
And that was, most likely, the last bit of footage you'll probably see of mine coming from Spain. Like I said, for Sketchalona, there's some retooling in the background. Mainly, I'm talking about my move to Southeast Asia, so more on that in the next Sketchalona. But I figured I still had some footage lying around from my last few weekend trips away while living in Catalonia, Spain. So I thought I'd share those in this episode of Making Phosphor for you guys. So here we are on the last page I'm going to show you. This is actually page 2. I'm quite pleased with how this one came out actually after I cut it up. I also did a lot of retouching with the brush like I did on that one page where I just took the brush to the figures and gave everything clearer black outlines as it was a little over-rendered. But I think we have just about come to the end of this episode 6. So I hope you guys had a good time watching along, seeing how I've improved in the last year and how I'm applying those lessons as rules to my pages, outright redrawing them, retouching them, the works. The things it takes to get this comic book out the door, more or less the way I want it. Like I said at the beginning, the comic book is pretty much there now. I'm just retouching these pages, and then it's time for the retouching, if you will, the dialogue and lettering. So more on that in the next episode. In the meantime, I hope you guys hit the bell. Next time I post a sketch doodle draw, I try and get them out on Mondays, where I draw one of my favorite characters. You'll be notified straight away by YouTube. So with that, have a good night, and I'll talk to you guys when I do. Till next time.